let's say antidepressants. It's a class of drugs people talk about a lot, and it's something I think about a lot, and something that Marsha Angel, who you were talking about earlier, writes about. I'm just always thinking about, if I were a psychiatrist, and I'm not, it's certainly above my pay grade or level of analysis, but if I were, how would I even balance that cost-benefit scenario for a given patient? And I'm curious if there's a difference between the way the old you may have thought about this and the new you as a critical psychiatrist thinks about this.
Well, I hope it's okay. What I'd like to introduce is a concept that's been enormously helpful for me to think about what I do, because, the day I put down anatomy, I wasn't sure I could go to work the next day. I mean, that's how profound it was for me. And that's why I just felt compelled to make sense of it. I mean, I knew some people who read it, were angry, and just tossed it aside, didn't think there was anything there. I don't fault them. It just wasn't how it hit me. Yeah. For the reasons that you articulated, there were certain things I thought he got right, and so I wasn't comfortable just ignoring the things that were new to me. But I hit one person that's had a big influence on me is a British psychiatrist, Joanna Moncrief. And she's written a lot about somewhat similar topics from the perspective of a psychiatrist. And she has conceptualized two kinds of approaches to pharmacotherapy. And one, what she calls a disease-centered approach, the other, a drug-centered approach. Mm-hmm. And she would argue that what's become the prominent conceptualization is a disease-centered approach. And that says these are drugs that treat a disease or disorder. That there's a problem that the drug fixes. Okay? And so when in the 90s, at the height of the SSRIs, there was a commercial on TV for the SSRI is an antidepressant selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And one of the drugs being promoted at the time is sertraline. It was marketed as Zoloft. And there would be this little ball of serotonin. And so selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor means that in the space between the nerve cells, to communicate, a nerve cell releases a chemical. They're called neurotransmitters. It gets taken up by the next nerve cell, and that's how they talk. And when this action is done, the neurotransmitter gets retaken up in the first nerve cell. It's basically like that. And what these SSRIs do is block the reuptake, taking up of serotonin. And so the idea became that depression must have to do with low serotonin, and by blocking its uptake, there's more serotonin. And so there was a commercial on TV where you'd see this little serotonin ball, and I guess there was a lot of them a long time ago. That's a core disease-centered approach, that you are sad because of not having enough serotonin. This drug fixes it. So that does a lot of things to people. It says that the drug is fixing it, so therefore I need to stay on it because the problem's going to come back. And there were some studies done showing what happens when people relapse, showing higher rates of recurrence of symptoms when the drug is stopped. And I can go into the problems with those drugs. Now, so that's a disease-centered approach. Now, a drug-centered approach says that these are fundamentally psychoactive substances. So in that way, it doesn't really distinguish between, let's say, the drugs I prescribe and other psychoactive substances, alcohol, cannabis, other things on the street that people take, that right. These are drugs that fundamentally alter the brain in such way as to sort of alter sort of mood or perception or other things. So it's a brain-based model, but that these effects are superimposed on whatever the problem is. And so like the SSRIs are working on the serotonin system. They may do other things. Some of them we know do other things. It's that imposition of a state that some people may find helpful and some people may not. So as you may recall, when I give this talk, I will talk about myself as a kind of nerdy person, and I'm not great in social settings. And there have been times when I'll go to sort of a cocktail party and feel uncomfortable, and I might have a little bit of alcohol. I'm not a big drinker, so I'm very susceptible to the effects. And I will experience the effects that everyone experiences: a little bit of disinhibition, a little bit of euphoria in the short term, and that effect will make this experience much more palatable to me. So you could say that from a disease-centered approach, you could say I have cocktail party deficit disorder, right, and the alcohol is treating the disorder. Mm-hmm. Or you could say I have a brain, my brain responds to alcohol the way that most do. And that superimposition of effect, for whatever reason I'm such a socially awkward person, helps me to get through the event. That's to me a good illustration. And you can have that conversation with every class of drugs. So that really, and with antipsychotics, that was a little bit of a leap for me. It took me a lot of time of reading, going back to the literature. What does the drug do to people who aren't psychotic? That's how you understand drug-centered effects and to reconsider what I do. And that changes the way I talk about these drugs with people. And I would argue it would change the kinds of questions we're asking, the way we study them, the way we think about withdrawal, which I think has been understudied in our field. So really that has, I don't know that I've actually answered your question, but for me, that's such an important way that I've changed in how I think about what I'm doing as a psychiatrist and how I talk to people that I would bring that up here.